All right, let's get some analysis on the moves the AG's office is making. Say hello to Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of WDET Radio. All right, I'm going to give you each just a quick shot at what kind of job you think that she's doing so far.
I think she's doing a fine job. She's doing what you would expect a Democrat who's elected to that job.
She's doing a lot of the things that she talked about on the campaign
She said she was going to do all of these things, so it's not a lot of surprise. I think, though, if you have an objection, it's that the AG's office should be more politically neutral. It hasn't been for a really long time. Bill Schuette was one of the most partisan AGs in the entire country. He set the stage for whoever was going to get elected after him on the other side to come in and undo all of it. I would hope that there's a way to get back to this idea of the Attorney General as a person who interprets the law and advocates for the state in legal terms and stays away from some of the more charged political issues. But you can't put that burden on her because they sure did not put it on Bill Schuette or on Michael Cox.
So you're saying the big shift this way, big shift back over. What are the two things that are concerning you most of all, Nolan? You've written about a couple of them.
I think she's going to blow Bill Schuette away in that regard. One, she's got her job confused with the legislature's jobs. She doesn't make jobs or laws, and she doesn't undo laws that the legislature has
she
passed.
does if she thinks they are in conflict with the state.
Her power. She can say, she can offer that opinion, but it's not in her power. There's separation of powers here. And she is not the legislative branch, and she's pushing that. She's trying to be.
Well, she
but my
steps
big
over there,
objection,
the
the biggest objection
big
I
objection
have with her is this hate crimes unit she and the civil rights director, Arbulu, have formed to, in their words, investigate hate that doesn't rise to either a civil infraction or to a crime.
So they want to keep track of incidents so they can possibly bring more conversation, understanding, or what?
Or shut down and harass people they disagree with. I think there's a Gestapo feel to this. You know, when you talk about tracking members of a group.
That's a pretty strong statement to
this
use.
is a pretty offensive.
To use that word.
And I use it intentionally because it's a pretty offensive idea that you would investigate people, keep track of people because they hold a different political view.
Is it keeping track of people, or is it keeping track of events?
No, I'm using their own description.
The idea
they want to take groups that they find offensive, and investigate things that don't rise to a crime or a civil infraction. That's an improper role.
So, you know, there is always this weird call from generally the right when people stand up on the left and say, we're going to deal with some of the bigotry that conservatives either look the other way for or, in worst cases, help foment. And say, well, this is somehow inappropriate.
You can't shut down thoughts, Steve.
No, it's not about shutting down thoughts.
Hang on. She's not saying shut down thought.
She said that.
How do you know that's not what they're going to do?
She's saying
when she says we're going to go after people for things that don't rise to crime or civil infractions.
Do you think
that's going after thought? That's going after political views.
Going after people. How so? What do you mean? What do you mean by
when
going
she says
after?
we're going to take, we're going to keep track of your membership list? That's an affront to free association. It's an affront to free speech. You can't defend that.
So at a time when we are dealing with more of this kind of activity than we have in the past, you think the Attorney General ought to just sort of sit back and say,
you don't suspend the Constitution. You have a
nothing
right of free association. Some of the groups
you know,
that she's identified are Catholic groups whose ideology she doesn't share. That's improper.
Or whose ideology is threatening the freedom of other people.
Not necessarily.
The right has always had a problem dealing with that.
If a group takes a stance against abortion, for example, or gay marriage.
Abortion, which is a constitutionally protected right.
And they have
gay marriage, which is also a constitutionally protected.
Against it.
But
as is the right to speak
but
against
not to act against it, not to intimidate
and she's
people,
not talking about. That's not what we're talking about.
She's not talking about prosecuting people on these lists.
She's not talking about
going after.
She's talking about tracking and investigating groups based on what they believe and say, not based on what they do.
But
you can't defend that.
So at what point do you start to deal with somebody who's
when they break the law?
Well, that's often too late. And you're talking about
turn that
groups
around,
that
then.
are you're talking about
Turn
groups
that
that
around.
are
That's
killing
what they
people.
How
You're
did you
talking
feel
about
when the
groups
FBI
that
was
are-
doing that to civil rights groups?
But civil rights groups
the
weren't
same
threatening
thing.
anyone else's liberties. That's not the same
J.
thing.
Edgar Hoover
Nolan.
thought they were.
No, he didn't.
So
no,
hang
he
on,
didn't.
hang on,
He
hang
just
on.
You can't
disagreed with
justify
Hang
that.
on. I'm going to dial it
And
back.
that's-
I
that's
want to
what
dial
she's-
it back.
It's not the
I want
same
to
thing.
dial it back for just a second because they're also talking about. They're also talking about keeping track of actions or things that don't rise to a criminal or rise to anything that can be prosecuted, but are disturbing enough that should be
To her.
to
her.
her and who else?
To her.
They're disturbing.
To her.
Well, but
You
she's the
can't-
attorney general.
That's not her
and there's
job
always
to keep track of things
So there's always
that
some
don't rise to a crime
Okay, so there's
or a civil
there's always some
infraction.
discretion involved, but I think what she would say is that what she's keeping track of is people whose speech, whose actions threaten the infringement of other people's rights, and that's really different from what. Hold on. That's
Hang on,
really
hang on,
different.
hang on one second. Let him finish the
That's
thought.
really different, and it's insulting for you to make that comparison. That's super different than what J. Edgar Hoover was doing to civil rights workers who were fighting for their own rights. They were never threatening anyone else's
So
rights.
it made me,
And
hang
that's
on
not what
one
these
second,
groups
hang on
are
one
doing.
second. I'm going to stop.
Track
I'm
of
gonna stop. Hang
membership
on one second.
lists.
Stop.
In hate
What
groups?
this made me think of
They're not hate
was,
groups.
hang on, when they talked about keeping track of things that happened that didn't rise to a prosecutorial offense,
Yeah.
it made me think back
She's got
to
no
that she
business
wants
doing that.
to track, so there's more conversation, that's what the civil liberties group said, and more
Less.
understanding. Okay, well that's what they said, that they
Less.
tried to
Less
frame it.
so.
So it made
If
me
you're
think,
intimidating people and
of
harassing
what would,
people
hang on,
based
Nolan.
on their views.
It made me think of what would fall into that category. And the example came to my mind of 2 years ago after the election when two girls in Royal Oak Middle School who were Hispanic girls, when they walked into the cafeteria, some children started chanting, "Build a wall" at them, "Build
happened
a
in a
wall."
lot of
Now,
places.
hang on. That made national news. Was that something that was criminal? Was that something that could be prosecuted? No. Is that something to be looked at and maybe flagged
And
and
done what with?
said, do we need more
Well,
education programs?
the group-
do we need
The
we
group
need
that's
to
suing them
assess
over
this at
this
all?
is a Catholic group that espouses for traditional marriage and against abortion. They have that right.
They do have that right, but what they don't have the right to
shouldn't have their
do-
membership looked at and examined, lists kept. They have the right to say that, and they have the right to free association. That's a very pretty example you gave, but that's not the practical impact
So-
here.
so
They're
the
going
problem-
after groups that she disagrees with ideologically.
So the problem historically is that the groups who speak against these things often have very close ties to the groups who act against these things. They raise money in ways that benefit the groups that act out and break the law. I think this is trying to get at the back shop networks
It's thought
that
police.
support these kinds of things.
No, it's
I don't think it's
thought
thought police.
It's
I'm
harassing,
not saying you can't think
it's
it.
harassing
It's
groups
saying-
that
it's saying
think
you
and feel
cannot act in a
differently
way.
than
You
They're
cannot-
not acting. She's not prosecuting
You can't act in a way
actions.
that aids and
They've got a
abets
right to speak,
crime.
and they've got a
Let
right
me,
to gather.
interestingly enough, this is just a small part of what her agenda has been. I mean, there are many, many other things. And it's funny, I did this interview with her 2 weeks ago, and the news cycle that has come since then
Right.
has been fast, has been very, very fast anyway.